After Sunday dinner, my granddaughter slipped a folded note into my sweater pocket and whispered, "Grandma, don't let them see this." I waited until my son and daughter-in-law drove away before opening it. Inside were 5 words that turned my blood cold. "Please run far away." 3 days later, my son smiled as he drove me to a lawyer's office to sign my will. He thought I was walking into his trap. He had no idea that one frightened 13-year-old had already changed everything. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a comment. Have you ever had someone you trusted try to take something that was yours? Yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs. Quick note, some details here are fictionalized to bring the lesson forward. The message is what I hope stays with you. I found the note in my cardigan pocket after they left a small square of paper folded so tight it could have been a child's secret. My fingers were still warm from washing the Sunday dinner dishes when I felt it tucked against the wool lining. I pulled it out slowly, the way you handle something that feels wrong, before you even know why. The handwriting was careful, shaky, young. "Grandma, please run far away." No signature, no explanation. Just those 5 words in pencil on notebook paper, the kind with the 3 holes punched down the side. I should start at the beginning. At 68, with soil still under my nails and 40 harvest seasons in my bones, I thought I understood my life. The farm had been mine and Howard's for decades. 280 acres of Nebraska prairie that we'd turned into something worth passing down. He died 3 years ago in his sleep, which the doctor said was a blessing. I wasn't sure about that. Blessings don't usually leave you standing in a quiet house wondering what comes next. But I'd learned to live with the quiet. Early September mornings on the front porch with coffee, watching cardinals fight over the feeder. The rhythms of planting and harvest. The satisfaction of work that leaves your hands tired and your mind clear. I knew every fence post on this land, every irrigation line, every corner where the soil ran rich or thin. Then Cedric started coming home. My son Cedric, 42 and polished in his tailored suits, had built a life in Omaha doing something with commercial properties that I'd never quite understood. He called twice a year, sent a Christmas card with a printed photo of his family. For 3 years after Howard died, that was enough. I didn't expect more. He had his own life, his own pressures. So when he showed up that first Sunday in mid-September with fresh coffee and a smile, I felt grateful. Surprised, but grateful. "Mom, you've been managing this place alone too long," he said, surveying the barn with what looked like genuine concern. "Let us help." Simone, 39 and sharp-eyed, sat beside him with her medical credentials and perfectly practiced smiles. She was a pediatric nurse practitioner, always ready with advice about my blood pressure or my vitamin D levels. That first visit, she'd brought homemade soup. "You need to take better care of yourself," she said, squeezing my hand. "That's what family is for." They came back the next Sunday, and the one after that. Cedric fixed the loose board on the porch steps. Simone drove me to a dentist appointment I'd been putting off. They brought their daughter, my granddaughter Briar, just 13, with her mother's dark eyes and a way of watching everything without saying much. I should have asked myself then, why now? Why, after 3 years of silence, broken only by holiday phone calls, had my son suddenly developed an interest in fence repairs and oil changes? Why did Simone keep finding reasons to organize my kitchen cabinets, to sort through the mail I'd stacked on the counter, to ask gentle questions about whether I'd been forgetting things lately? But I didn't ask. I was lonely and they were there, and I told myself I was lucky. Trust is a thing you build over decades. Fear can undo it in seconds. That night at dinner, 3 weeks into their new routine, Cedric brought it up casually over pot roast. "Mom, I've been thinking, we should get your will documents in order. Just paperwork, really. Simple stuff." He cut his meat as he said it, like he was suggesting we check the tire pressure. "While you're still sharp and clear-minded," he added, "it'll make everything easier down the road." Simone nodded, passing the potatoes. "We just want to protect you. Make sure everything's handled properly." Briar kept her eyes on her plate. She hadn't looked at me once during the meal. "Well," I said slowly, "if you think it's necessary." "I've already talked to a lawyer," Cedric said. "Good guy. He can walk us through everything. Thursday morning work for you." "Us?" He said us like my will was a family project. I said yes because I didn't know what else to say. Because they were my family, and families help each other, and I was 68 years old, managing a farm alone. Maybe I did need help. Maybe this was what love looked like now. They left around 8, Cedric promising to pick me up Thursday at 9:30. Simone gave me a long hug at the door, the kind that feels more like an assessment than affection. Briar trailed behind them toward the car, and I thought I saw her glance back at me, once something urgent in her expression. But then they were gone, taillights disappearing down the gravel drive, and I was alone in my kitchen with dirty dishes and a feeling I couldn't name. That's when I found the note. I unfolded it completely, now my hands steadier than they should have been. The full message appeared in that same careful, frightened handwriting. "Grandma, please run far away. Don't let them find you." No signature. But I knew the moment I saw those words who had written them, who had been brave enough or terrified enough to slip a warning into my pocket when her parents weren't looking. "Briar," I called toward the stairs even though I knew she was long gone. "Briar, honey, come back down here." Silence answered me, the kind of silence that confirms what you already know. I stood in my kitchen holding that piece of paper, watching darkness settle over the fields Howard and I had worked for 40 years. The coffee from this morning had gone cold in the pot. The house creaked the way old houses do, familiar sounds that suddenly felt like warnings. For the first time in 68 years, I was afraid of my own son. Not for myself, not exactly. I was afraid of what it meant that a 13-year-old child had seen the danger before I did, that she'd known to warn me when I was still calling it love. Thursday morning came too fast. I'd spent 3 nights lying awake with Briar's note on my nightstand, those 5 penciled words burning themselves into my mind. I wanted to call her to demand answers, but what could a 13-year-old tell me that wouldn't put her in more danger? So I waited and watched. And when Cedric's BMW pulled into my driveway at 9:30 sharp, I was ready. Or I thought I was. "Morning, Mom," he said, all warmth and coffee shop charm. He'd brought pastries in a white bakery bag. "Ready to get this paperwork out of the way." I reached for my phone on the kitchen counter the way I always did before leaving the house. Cedric's hand closed over mine before I could pick it up. "Leave it at home, Mom." His voice was gentle, reasonable. "The office has terrible signal anyway. Sign the papers, then call anyone you want." I looked down at my phone, then up at my son's face. Remembered Briar's warning. Saw the careful patience in his expression, the kind you use with someone you're managing. "All right," I said, pulling my hand away slowly. "If you think that's best." "Perfect," he said, and his smile widened. "This'll be quick and easy." I left my phone on the counter, left it there like he wanted. But as I climbed into his passenger seat, I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel too tight. The way he checked his mirrors constantly like he was worried about being followed. The way he didn't ask me a single question about how I'd been, what I'd been thinking, whether I'd slept well. He wasn't making conversation, he was managing time. The drive to Grand Island took 20 minutes. Cedric filled the silence with a rehearsed monologue about property taxes and estate planning words that sounded important but said nothing. I watched the autumn fields roll past and wondered when I'd become someone who needed to be handled. The law office sat in a converted brick building downtown, the kind of place that whispered old money and quiet power. Lennox Griffin, the attorney Cedric had chosen, was younger than I expected. 41 maybe, with careful eyes that tracked every word his client said. He shook my hand with professional warmth and gestured us toward leather chairs facing his mahogany desk. "Mrs. Hoffman," he said, opening a thick folder, "I've prepared the documents your son requested. Let me walk you through each section." He started reading, not the way lawyers usually read, quick and dismissive, but slowly, deliberately, like he wanted me to understand every word. "This clause transfers ownership of all real property to—" "Mom already knows about that part," Cedric cut in, leaning forward. "Can we skip ahead? She's got things to do today." Lennox's eyes flicked to Cedric, then back to me. "Mrs. Hoffman, do you understand what this clause means?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Cedric was faster. "She's been managing property for 40 years. Of course she understands. How do you know when to stop trusting the person you raised from birth? When do the years of diapers and homework and proud graduation stop mattering? I didn't know. But sitting in that office watching my son interrupt a lawyer who was trying to explain what I was signing, I started to learn. Lennox set down his pen, looked at Cedric with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Hoffman," he said, his voice level and firm. "I need Mrs. Hoffman to hear this directly." Cedric laughed, but it came out wrong, too sharp. "Of course, sorry, go ahead." Lennox turned back to me, and I saw something in his face that made my chest tighten with hope. He wasn't just reading anymore. He was watching, noting. His pen moved across a legal pad, writing something Cedric couldn't see from his angle. He continued through the documents, and every time Cedric tried to interrupt Lennox, shut him down with polite steel. By the time we reached the last page, my son's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. "Mrs. Hoffman," Lennox said, sliding a pen across the desk. "Do you have any questions before signing?" I looked at the signature line. At the pen, at my son's face, carefully composed but straining at the edges. "I have a headache," I said. "Can I take these home, review them when I'm feeling better?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Mom," Cedric said, his smile still there, but fitting wrong now, like a mask worn too long in summer heat. "We're already here. Just sign it." "I'd like to wait," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "Read everything carefully when my head's clear." Lennox nodded immediately. "Of course, take all the time you need." Cedric stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. "We'll be in touch," he said to Lennox, his hand already on my arm, pulling me toward the door. The parking lot was empty, except for our 2 cars. October sun beat down on the asphalt, making the air shimmer. Cedric walked me to his BMW and opened the passenger door, but when I moved to get in his hand, shot out and gripped the doorframe, blocking me. "Mom," his voice had changed. No warmth now, no patience, just cold, hard pressure. "We need this done. Today." I looked at my son and saw a stranger. "I need to go home and rest, Cedric. I'll sign when I'm ready." "When you're ready." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're 68 years old, managing a farm you can barely keep up with. You need help, and I'm trying to give it to you. Stop being difficult." "I'll sign when I'm ready, Cedric, not before." For a long moment we stared at each other. Then he stepped back, releasing the doorframe. "Fine," he said, his voice like ice. "Have it your way, but you're making this harder than it needs to be." He drove me home in silence, dropped me at my door without another word, and drove away fast enough to spray gravel. I stood in my driveway watching his taillights disappear, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. Then I went inside, grabbed my phone from the counter, and held it like a lifeline. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, wondering what came next. At 11:47 p.m., my phone lit up the darkness, Briar's name on the screen. My granddaughter had never called me this late in her life. I answered on the second ring, my heart already hammering. "Briar." Her voice was barely a whisper, so quiet I had to press the phone hard against my ear. "Grandma, if they take you there again tomorrow, don't come back home." The room felt suddenly cold despite the September warmth. I sat up in bed, fumbling for the lamp switch. "Briar, honey, what do you know? Tell me what's happening." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of an empty line, but the silence of someone covering their mouth, trying not to breathe too loud. Then, "I can't tell you, not yet, but please, Grandma, trust me." "Where are you right now? Are you safe?" "I'm in my room. They think I'm asleep. I had to wait until—" Her voice cut off abruptly. I heard something in the background, a door creaking, footsteps on hardwood. "Briar." The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, Howard's photograph on the nightstand, catching the moonlight through the window. We'd bought that frame together 40 years ago, back when we thought we had forever. Back when I thought I knew what family meant. I didn't try calling back. Whatever danger Briar was in, a ringing phone at midnight would only make it worse. But her warning echoed in my head until dawn. "Don't come back home." As if home wasn't mine anymore, as if I was already gone. I didn't sleep. By 5:30, I was dressed and walking the property line like I did every morning, checking fence posts and irrigation markers. Except this morning I came back early, an hour early, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, before anyone expected me. The kitchen light was on when I approached the house. Through the window, I could see 2 figures at my table. Cedric and Simone, coffee cups between them, heads bent together like conspirators. I stopped on the back porch, my hand on the door handle. Something in their posture made me freeze. The intensity of their conversation, the way Simone kept jabbing her finger against the table for emphasis. I didn't go in. Instead, I moved to the side where the kitchen door stood slightly ajar for ventilation. Pressed myself against the weathered siding and listened. Simone's voice came through clear and sharp. "Just get her to sign. Everything will be ours." "She's getting suspicious," Cedric said. "Yesterday at the lawyer she refused to sign, asked to take the documents home." "Then move faster." Simone's voice turned hard in a way I'd never heard before. "Once she signs, it's done. We sell the farm, pay the bank, start over. Sell the farm." 3 words. That's all it took. 40 years. Every fence post I'd mended, every harvest Howard and I had brought in together, our hands blistered and our backs aching. Every mortgage payment we'd made by sacrificing vacations and new clothes, and everything except the land itself. Every morning, I'd stood on that porch watching the sun rise over fields we'd planted with our own hands. 3 words could erase it all. My hands were shaking. These hands that had worked this soil for 4 decades, that had buried my husband 3 years ago, that had raised the man sitting in my kitchen planning to steal everything I'd built. "How much do we actually owe?" Cedric asked, his voice dropping. "Enough that we need this done by the end of the month," Simone said. The bank's not going to wait much longer. If she keeps refusing, she won't. Simone cut him off. She's old Cedric. She's isolated. She trusts you. We just need to push harder. Take her back to that lawyer, and this time, don't let her leave until the signature's done. I backed away from the door before I could hear more, moved carefully quietly like I was the intruder in my own home. Crossed the yard in the gray dawn light and walked to Howard's office. The building sat separate from the main house, a converted shed where Howard had managed the farm's business for 30 years. I'd barely touched it since he died. Couldn't bear to sort through his filing cabinets and ledgers, all the careful records he'd kept. Now I walked inside and closed the door behind me. The office still smelled like him. Coffee and paper and the faint sweetness of the pipe tobacco he'd smoked on the porch at night. His leather chair sat behind the oak desk, worn smooth by years of use. His reading glasses still rested on the blotter where he'd left them the day before his heart stopped. I sat down in his chair and let the rage work through me. Cedric had been planning this for months, maybe longer. The sudden visits, the concerned phone calls, the offers to help. All of it building toward a single moment when I'd sign away everything Howard and I had built, everything we'd bled, for everything we'd intended to leave behind, as proof we'd mattered. How does a 13-year-old child see the danger before the woman who raised the man committing it? How does a girl who should be worried about homework and friendships end up being the only person brave enough to warn me that my own son wants to erase me? I looked at Howard's photograph on the desk, the same picture I kept on my nightstand. Different frame, same moment captured. Our wedding day, both of us 25, and stupid with hope. He didn't plan for her, I said out loud to the empty room. He didn't plan for Briar. That was the variable Cedric had missed. The child he'd assumed would stay silent. The granddaughter who'd proven braver than any adult in this mess. I stood up and walked to the filing cabinet against the wall. Howard had kept everything here. Every deed, every contract, every piece of paper that proved this farm was ours. If Cedric had been this methodical, this careful, he wouldn't have left it to chance. He'd have prepared, documented, made sure he knew exactly what he was taking. I pulled open the top drawer. The folders were still there, lined up in Howard's meticulous alphabetical order. But something was wrong. The alignment was off by fractions of an inch. The edges weren't quite flush. Someone had been through these files, and I knew exactly who. I knelt in front of the filing cabinet, my hands trembling as I pulled the drawer wider. The folder tabs looked right at first glance, insurance, property deeds, bank statements, but the alignment was off. The property deeds folder sat a 1/4 inch higher than it should. The insurance folder had been pushed too far back. I lifted the property deeds folder out carefully. The papers felt too loose, not pressed together the way documents get after sitting undisturbed for months. I held the top page up to the desk lamp. There, in the upper corner, was a faint smudge of oil, the kind of residue a fingertip leaves. My chest tightened. I pulled out the bank statements folder next. Same thing. Oil smudges on the corners where someone had held each page steady, for photographing. Cedric hadn't just been snooping. He'd been documenting, creating his own copies of every financial record in this house. This wasn't a sudden desperation move. This was methodical. This was planned. I thought back to the last few months. How many times had Cedric stopped by just to check in? How many afternoons had he spent in this office while I was outside with the chickens? I'd thought he was being a good son, making sure I wasn't lonely after losing Howard. But he'd been building a case. How long? I whispered to the empty room. The bank statements folder went back to April, 5 months ago. The oil smudges were on every page. 5 months. He'd started this while Howard was still alive. I sat back on my heels, the folder slipping from my hands. Cedric had been planning to take this farm while my husband was dying in the hospital. While I was spending 16-hour days at Howard's bedside, Cedric had been here alone photographing our lives. The anger that rose in my throat was bitter and hot. I wanted to storm upstairs right now, throw open their bedroom door, and demand answers. I wanted to scream at him until my voice gave out. But Briar's whispered warning from last night echoed in my head. Don't come back home yet. Something else was happening, something I didn't understand yet. I forced myself to breathe. If Cedric had been documenting our finances for 5 months, what else had he copied? I spent the next hour going through every folder in that cabinet. Insurance policies photographed, Howard's will photographed, the deed to the rental house in Hastings photographed, even old tax returns, everything that proved what we owned, everything that showed the value of this estate. Cedric had copied it all. By the time I finished, my knees ached from kneeling on the hardwood floor. This wasn't a son worried about his inheritance. This was someone building a detailed inventory, someone preparing for a takeover. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom just before 11, moving quietly past Cedric and Simone's closed door. The light underneath was off. The September night pressed thick and humid against my window. I lay on top of the covers in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around me. Every creak of wood made my pulse jump. I must have dozed off sometime after midnight, because the next thing I knew, someone was tapping lightly on my bedroom door. I sat up fast, my heart hammering. The clock on my nightstand read 2:17 a.m. Another tap. Then Briar's voice, barely audible. "Grandma, are you awake?" I crossed the room in 3 steps and opened the door a crack. Briar stood in the hallway in her pajamas, her phone's flashlight pointed at the floor. Her face was pale. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "I need to give you something," she said. "Can I come in?" I pulled her inside and closed the door silently. Briar reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "What is this?" I asked. Briar pressed it into my palm. "Security footage," she said, "from the cameras Dad installed last year. He thinks they only save for 24 hours, but I changed the settings. They've been recording to the cloud for 6 months." I stared at the USB drive. "What's on it?" "Everything," Briar whispered. "Every time Dad came into this office when you weren't home. Every conversation he and Mom had in the kitchen about selling the farm. Every time he—" Her voice cracked. "Every time he lied to your face." I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. She was shaking. "Does he know you have this?" I asked. "No. I downloaded it tonight while they were asleep. Grandma, you need to leave. Just for a few days. Go somewhere he can't find you. Because if he figures out that you know—" She pulled back, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "If he figures it out, I don't know what he'll do." "I'm not going to let him scare me out of my own home," I said. Briar shook her head. "You're not running away. You're getting somewhere safe so you can fight back. There's a difference." Out of the mouths of 13-year-olds, she left as quietly as she'd come, slipping back down the hallway to her room like a ghost. I sat on the edge of my bed, turning the USB drive over in my hands. 6 months of footage. 6 months of evidence. I didn't sleep after that. I lay in the dark making plans. At 5:30 a.m., while the house was still silent, I packed a small bag with clothes for 3 days. I wrote a note on the kitchen counter, went to Grand Island to run errands, back tomorrow, Mom. Let Cedric think I was running errands. Let him think he had more time. I drove east as the sun came up, watching the Hoffman farm disappear in my rearview mirror. The rental house in Hastings wasn't much a 2-bedroom rambler we'd bought as an investment property 15 years ago, but it was mine. Cedric didn't have a key. I could breathe there. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Cedric by noon. I didn't call him back. Instead, I pulled out the business card Lennox Griffin had given me, the one with his direct line written on the back in pen. Time to stop running. Time to build a case. I dialed Lennox Griffin's direct line. He picked up almost immediately. "Mrs. Hoffman," he said, "I was hoping you'd call." "I need help," I said. "My son is trying to take my farm." "I know," Lennox said. "I'm already on my way." The knock came 2 hours later, 3 sharp raps that made me jump even though I'd been expecting him. I opened the door to find Lennox Griffin standing on the rental house porch in jeans and a button-down shirt, a thick manila folder tucked under one arm. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He walked into the small living room and set the folder on the coffee table with the care of someone handling evidence. "Mrs. Hoffman, after you left my office Thursday, I couldn't sleep," he said. "So I ran a comprehensive background check on your son's business entities." I sat down slowly on the couch, and Lennox opened the folder. Inside were printed spreadsheets, court documents, bank statements. He spread them across the table like a prosecutor laying out a case. "Cedric owes $417,000 across 6 creditors," Lennox said. 3 active lawsuits, 2 judgments already entered against him. His construction company hasn't turned a profit in 3 years. My hands went cold. $400,000. "And that's just what I could document," Lennox said. "Mrs. Hoffman, your son came to me 6 weeks ago, asking me to help him petition for conservatorship over your estate. He claimed you were showing signs of dementia, that you couldn't manage your finances, that you needed protection." The room tilted slightly. "I don't have dementia." "I know," Lennox said quietly. "That's why I started asking questions. 2 other estate attorneys in Grand Island refused to take his case before he came to me. That alone told me everything I needed to know." I stared at the papers on the table. $417,000. My farm was worth $3.2 million. Cedric didn't just want the farm. He needed it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Isn't he your client?" Lennox met my eyes. He was, but I can't be part of this, and I won't. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I've been recording our consultation sessions since the second meeting. He has no idea. The air went out of my lungs. You recorded him. Every lie, Lennox said. Every manipulation tactic. Every time he tried to coach me on how to convince a judge you were incompetent. Nebraska is a one-party consent state, Mrs. Hoffman. These recordings are completely legal, and they're yours if you want them. I looked at the recorder sitting on the table next to the folder. When does a lawyer choose his conscience over his client's fee? Why, I whispered. Lennox was quiet for a moment. My mother lost her farm to my uncle when I was 12, he said. He used the same playbook, debts, lies, painted her as incompetent. By the time she figured out what was happening, it was too late. He pushed the recorder toward me. I was 12. I couldn't help her, but I can help you. Before I tell you what arrived 3 days later, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think Cedric will back down when exposed, or B, if you think he'll escalate and add one reason why in 5 to 10 words. Please note what follows includes some recreated details for narrative depth, but the message is what matters. The envelope appeared under my door on Tuesday morning. Plain white, no postage, my name written in blue ballpoint pen across the front. I knew Briar's handwriting before I even opened it. The letter inside was short, written on notebook paper torn from a spiral binder. The ragged edge still clung to the left margin. Grandma, Dad found out I helped you. He checked the phone bill and saw I'd called you that night. He took my phone. I'm not allowed to leave my room except for school and meals. He told Mom not to say your name in the house anymore. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. Are you okay? I love you. P.S. Mr. Harvey says hi. Briar. I read it 3 times before my hands started shaking. Mr. Harvey. Harvey Shepard, 72, and still walking his mail route after 3 decades, had known me long enough to recognize when something was wrong without asking questions. Briar must have given him the letter at the mailbox. He must have driven here himself to deliver it. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, the letter still clutched in both hands. Cedric had locked her up. My 13-year-old granddaughter was a prisoner in my own house because she'd tried to warn me. Because she'd been brave enough to hand me that USB drive in the middle of the night. And what had I done? I'd run. I'd left her there. The tears came then hot and furious, the kind I hadn't allowed myself since Howard died. Not tears of fear this time. Tears of rage. Because Briar, 13 years old, still young enough to believe the adults around her would protect her, had more courage than any of us. There's a particular kind of bravery that belongs only to children. The kind that acts even when terrified because someone they love needs them. Briar had that. I needed to prove I had it too. I was still sitting on the floor when my phone rang that afternoon. Cedric's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. Then I remembered Lennox's recorder sitting on the counter here. The file folder full of debts and lawsuits, the plan we'd started building. I answered. Mom, Cedric said. His voice was smooth again, the concerned son performance fully restored. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to have a family dinner. Everyone will be there. Just to talk, to clear the air. I closed my eyes. Pictured Briar locked in her room. Pictured Cedric's $417,000 in debt. Pictured the recorder. When? I asked. Friday night, Cedric said. 6 o'clock at the farm. Will you come? Yes, I said. I'll be there. I heard the relief in his voice when he said goodbye. He thought I was walking into his trap. He thought I'd show up confused, emotional, easy to control. He thought he'd already won. I said yes to that dinner invitation without a moment's hesitation. Not because I trusted my son, because Lennox and I had already prepared something Cedric would never see coming. The trap was set. I just needed to walk into his. Lennox came back the next day with a plan. He spread the documents across my rental kitchen table like a general planning a siege. Bank statements showing Cedric's debt. Court filings from the lawsuits. Email printouts where Cedric had asked other attorneys about expedited conservatorship for elderly parent. And in the center of it all, the small digital recorder. Cedric still thinks I'm his attorney, Lennox said. He has no idea I've flipped, so when I show up at that dinner tomorrow night, he'll think I'm there to help him close the deal. I stared at the recorder. And then we let him perform, Lennox said. Let him give his speech about family unity and minor misunderstandings. Let him slide those documents across the table. And when he asks you to sign, Lennox tapped the recorder. I play this. In front of everyone. Lennox confirmed. Your extended family, Simone, Breyer, every witness he invited to watch you surrender. They'll hear him tell me to limit your understanding of the documents. They'll hear him coach me on how to make you sign without explaining what you're actually agreeing to. They'll hear every calculated word. I picked up the recorder, turning it over in my hands. It was smaller than my phone. Lighter. Hard to believe something this size could destroy a man's entire performance. What happens after? I asked. Legally. Lennox leaned back in his chair. Undue influence over a vulnerable senior during will execution, backed by audio of him explicitly telling his attorney to manipulate your comprehension, that's textbook elder abuse. It voids every document he's drafted, and depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wants to be, it could trigger criminal charges. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and fell silent. This is the midpoint, Lennox said quietly. You understand that, right? You're not the victim anymore. You haven't been for days. You stopped running the moment you called me. Everything since then, the planning, the evidence gathering, bringing me to that dinner, you've been building a prosecution. You're the hunter now, Mrs. Hoffman, not the prey. I looked at the papers spread across my table. My son's debts, my son's lies, my son's 42 years of taking and taking and taking, always with a smile, always with an excuse. And if this goes wrong, I asked, then we take them to court, Lennox said. And we win there too. But it won't go wrong. Cedric spent so long believing you're easy to control that he's forgotten to watch his back. I set the recorder down carefully in the center of the table. All right, I said, and let's do it. The next evening, I put on the blue dress I'd worn to Howard's funeral. He'd always said it made me look unmovable. I needed that tonight. A trap is only as good as the bait. And I was about to walk into my own farmhouse as the most dangerous bait of all, a mother who knew exactly what her son had become. I drove to the farm alone, just as the sun dropped below the horizon, painting the fields in shades of amber and rust. The house I'd lived in for 43 years looked the same as always. White siding wraparound porch, Howard's wind chimes still hanging by the door. But tonight, it felt like foreign territory. I parked next to Cedric's truck and Simone's sedan. Lennox's car was already there. He'd arrived early, playing his role perfectly. Inside, the dining room had been set for a formal dinner. The good china, the linen napkins Howard's mother had embroidered, candles and silver holders down the center of the table. Cedric had staged this like a performance. Cedric stood at the head of the table in a pressed shirt and tie, looking every inch the dutiful son. Simone moved around the table, pouring wine into crystal glasses, her smile warm and welcoming. Breyer sat in the corner chair silent, her eyes locked on me the moment I walked through the door. She didn't blink, didn't smile. Just watched. Lennox stood near the window, hands in his pockets, playing the neutral professional. Mom, Cedric said, crossing the room to pull out my chair. I'm so glad you came. Please sit. I sat. The chair felt wrong, too formal, too staged. This was my house, my table, but I was being treated like a guest at my own execution. Cedric returned to the head of the table and cleared his throat. The room fell silent. I think we all know there's been a minor misunderstanding, Cedric began. His voice was measured, rehearsed. But family must always stand united. Mom, you've been under a lot of stress since Dad passed. We all understand that. Grief does strange things to people, makes them suspicious, makes them pull away from the people who love them most. Across the table, Simone nodded sympathetically. Breyer's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. So tonight I wanted everyone here, Cedric continued, as witnesses to our reconciliation, to prove that we're still a family, that we still trust each other. He reached into a leather folder beside his plate and pulled out a small stack of papers. He slid them across the table toward me, along with a pen. Mom, we just need your signature, Cedric said. One more time, for all of us. I looked down at the documents. The top page was titled, Durable Power of Attorney. The second page, Healthcare Directive. The third, Transfer on Death Deed. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting. How many times can you sign your life away to the same person before you realize they were never asking, they were taking? I picked up the pen. Cedric's shoulders relaxed. Simone smiled. Even Lennox shifted his weight slightly, the signal we'd rehearsed. I held the pen over the signature line. Let the moment stretch. Let Cedric believe for just one more second that he'd finally won. Then I looked up at Lennox. Actually, Lennox, I said, would you like to play something for the family first? Lennox placed the small digital recorder in the center of the table between the wine glasses and the lies. Cedric's smile faltered. What's this? Just something I thought the family should hear, Lennox said. He pressed play. The recording crackled for a moment, then Cedric's voice filled the dining room, clear and unmistakable. Just get her to sign, the recorded Cedric said. Don't explain too much. The less she understands, the better. Lennox's voice responded on the tape, measured and professional. Mr. Hoffman, she has the legal right to understand what she's signing before. She's old, Cedric interrupted, his tone dismissive. She forgets things. Just move on. Get the signature. That's what I'm paying you for. The recorder kept playing. More of Cedric's voice, more instructions on how to manipulate, how to limit my comprehension, how to make me sign documents I wouldn't understand until it was too late. The silence in that dining room was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of family gathered around a table. The kind of silence that follows an explosion. The kind where everyone stops breathing because the air itself has turned to glass. I watched the faces around me, relatives I'd known for decades staring at the recorder in horror. Simone's hands frozen on her wineglass, her eyes fixed on her lap. Briar sat motionless, tears streaming down her face without sound. And Cedric. For the first time in his 42 years, my son had no words. Lennox reached over and stopped the recording. The click of the button sounded like a gavel. That's from our third consultation, Lennox said quietly. October 17th, there are 4 more recordings, all similar. Cedric's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked at me, then at Lennox, then back at me. Mom, he said, his voice cracked on the word. It's not what it sounds like. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor loud in the suffocating quiet. I built this farm with your father, I said. My voice came out steady, calm, absolutely clear. 40 years, every fence post, every harvest, every mortgage payment through droughts and floods, and years when we didn't know if we'd make it to spring. You will not have it, Cedric. Not this way. Mom, I can explain. You already did, I said. We all heard it. Cedric looked around the table searching for allies. Found none. Every face that met his gaze showed the same thing: horror, disgust, betrayal. How does a lie sound when it meets the open air like death, like ending? You don't understand, Cedric said, his voice rising with desperation. The business we have debts. I was just trying to steal from your mother, Lennox finished quietly, while convincing her she was too incompetent to notice. That's called elder abuse, Mr. Hoffman. It's a felony in Nebraska. The color drained from Cedric's face. Simone stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. She grabbed Cedric's arm without looking at anyone, without attempting explanation or defense. Just pulled him toward the door with the practiced efficiency of someone executing an evacuation plan. Cedric let himself be pulled. He looked back once as they reached the doorway, his eyes meeting mine. I don't know what he was searching for. Forgiveness, maybe. Understanding. Some sign that this could be fixed with the right words, the right apology, the right performance. I gave him nothing. The relatives parted silently to let them pass. No one tried to stop them. No one said goodbye. The front door opened and closed. A moment later, car doors slammed in the driveway. An engine started. Gravel crunched under tires as they drove away from the farm for what I suspected would be the last time. The dining room stayed quiet. Everyone looked at their plates, their hands anywhere but at each other. One by one they stood, murmured excuses, touched my shoulder as they passed. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty except for Lennox, Briar, and me. Lennox began gathering the papers spread across the table, organizing them back into his folder with careful precision. I'll file these with Adult Protective Services tomorrow morning, he said, along with the USB drive from Briar and the documentation of his debts. They'll open an investigation. What happens after that depends on the prosecutor, but at minimum, every document he's had you sign in the past year will be voided. I nodded. Words felt too heavy just then. Lennox picked up his folder and the recorder. I'll leave you two alone, he said. Call me if you need anything. He left through the kitchen door, pulling it shut quietly behind him. The house settled into a different kind of silence, the kind that comes after storms. When the air is clean but everything is broken. I felt a small hand slip into mine. Briar stood beside me, still in her chair, her face streaked with tears. She looked up at me with eyes that were too old for 13, too tired, too full of things she shouldn't have had to carry. I'm sorry, Grandma, she whispered. I wasn't brave enough to stop them. I only knew how to tell you to run. I pulled her up out of the chair and wrapped my arms around her. She collapsed against me, weeping violently, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for weeks. You were brave enough, I said into her hair. That piece of paper you gave me, that note you handed me in the driveway, that was everything. That was what started all of this. I was so scared, Briar sobbed. I didn't know what else to do. You did exactly what needed to be done, I said. You saved me, Briar. You saved both of us. The bravest person in that room was 13 years old and terrified. The rest of us were just catching up. I held her while she cried. Let her weep out the fear and the guilt and the impossible weight of being a child caught between her parents and her grandmother. I had no tears left. I'd already wept them all in that rental house 3 days ago. So I simply held her, steady, unmoving, the way Howard used to hold me when I needed someone to be stronger than I felt. Eventually, her sobs quieted. She pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, we figure out what comes next, together. The next morning, I called an attorney. Not Lennox, a different one. One who would help me rewrite everything from the ground up. The farm, the properties, the legacy. This time, I would choose who deserved to carry what I'd built. 1 week later, I sat across from Nora Caldwell, 53, and sharp-eyed the independent estate attorney I'd hired through a referral from someone Lennox trusted. She slid the new will across her desk with careful precision. Take your time, Nora said. Read every word. Ask questions. This is your document, Mrs. Hoffman, no one else's. So I did. I read every clause, every condition, every protection I was building into my legacy. This time no one interrupted. No one rushed me. No one told me I didn't need to understand the details. The structure was clean. The majority of the estate would fund a scholarship trust in Howard's name for rural Nebraska students pursuing agricultural degrees, kids who wanted to work the land the way we had. The farm itself would remain mine for my lifetime, then transfer to the trust. One rental property would go to the trust immediately upon my death. The other, the house in Hastings, where I'd hidden and planned and found my spine again, would go to Briar. But not until she turned 25. Not until she'd earned a university degree and lived independently for at least 2 years. Not until she'd proven she could stand on her own. Cedric and Simone would receive nothing. Nora had asked me 3 times if I was certain about that clause. 3 times I'd said yes. People will assume it's revenge, Nora had warned during our first meeting. Cutting your son out completely, they'll call it cruel. Let them, I'd said. I'm not doing this out of cruelty. I'm doing it because the greatest act of love I have left for Cedric is forcing him to finally stand on his own. He's 42 years old. He's never had to build anything that wasn't handed to him or taken from someone else. Maybe this is the only way he learns. Nora had studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we'll write it that way. Now sitting in her office with the finished will in front of me, I signed my name at the bottom. Clear, legible. Witnessed by Nora's paralegal and secretary, neither of whom had any connection to my family. It's done, Nora said, sliding the document into a folder. I'll file the original with the county recorder's office. You'll get a certified copy for your records. 3 weeks after the dinner, the letter arrived from Adult Protective Services. I opened it at my kitchen table on a gray December morning while frost painted patterns on the windows. The language was formal, bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. They'd reviewed the evidence. The USB drive with security footage, the audio recordings from Lennox, the documentation of Cedric's debts and his attempts to gain control of my estate. They were coordinating with the county prosecutor's office regarding potential criminal charges, elder financial abuse, attempted theft by deception. In Nebraska, elder fraud involving assets over $100,000 constituted a Class 3 felony, 2 to 4 years in prison. I folded the letter and set it on the table. Outside the farm sat quiet under December's muted light, the fields empty and resting. Everything looked the same as it had 40 years ago when Howard and I first walked this land together. They were facing criminal investigation. My son and his wife, the boy I'd carried for 9 months and raised through fevers and broken bones and first days of school. The man who'd sat at the same table a month ago and tried to convince me I was too old, too confused, too incompetent to understand my own life. I felt no joy, no sorrow, only the weight of what had to be done. Is justice the same as healing? Or are they just 2 different ways of surviving what breaks you? I didn't know the answer. Maybe there wasn't one. I'd done everything a mother could do, everything a widow could do, everything a landowner protecting 4 decades of work could do. The rest was up to lawyers and prosecutors and judges who'd never met Howard, who'd never seen what we'd built from nothing. I filed the letter in the drawer with the rest of the documentation, closed it, went back to my coffee. December wore on. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. I kept the farmhouse warm, kept the walks shoveled, kept the routines Howard and I had maintained for years. Morning coffee on the porch when the weather allowed. Evening news at 6. Dinner at the kitchen table, even though I was the only one sitting there. Christmas approached the way winter approaches in Nebraska, inevitable, relentless, without apology. There would be no family gathering this year. No Cedric and Simone arriving with wine and hollow smiles. No Briar sitting quiet in the corner watching everything protecting me in the only ways a 13-year-old knew how. Just me, the farm, and the ghost of every Christmas Howard and I had celebrated in this house. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke to fresh snow covering the fields. The world looked clean, new, like God had taken an eraser to all the mistakes and given us blank pages. I made coffee, pulled on my boots and heavy coat, stepped out onto the porch to watch the sun rise over the white expanse of land I'd fought so hard to keep. That's when I saw it. A card lying on the porch just in front of the door. Plain white envelope, no stamp. Someone had delivered it by hand. I picked it up and my breath caught. I knew the handwriting before I even turned it over. Careful block letters in blue pen, the way they teach kids in elementary school. The way Briar had written that note she'd pressed into my hand in the driveway a lifetime ago. Christmas came quietly that year. Just me, the farm, and a card slipped under the door on Christmas Eve morning. I recognized the handwriting before I even picked it up. Briar's. I didn't open the card that night. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and left it there while I made dinner and watched the evening news and went to bed in the same house where I'd raised my son and lost my husband and nearly lost everything. Christmas morning came with winter mist clinging to the fields, and I opened Briar's card on the porch where I'd watched cardinals fight over seed 4 months ago, back when I still thought family meant the people who shared your blood, not the people who warned you to run. I wrapped myself in Howard's old wool blanket and carried my coffee outside into the cold December air. The farm stretched out in front of me white and silent under fresh snow. The barn, the fence posts, the fields that had fed us for 40 years. Everything I'd fought to keep. I sat in the same rocking chair where this whole story started back in August, when the world was green, and I didn't yet know what my son had become. Now it was winter, the world was white, and I was still here. I opened the envelope carefully the way you open something precious. The card inside was simple store-bought, a watercolor cardinal on the front. Inside, Briar's handwriting filled the space in careful block letters, the kind that take time and concentration for a 13-year-old. Grandma, it read. I'm okay. I'm staying with Aunt Carol for now. She's nice. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver sooner, but you showed me what brave looks like. I won't forget. Love, Briar. I read it 3 times. Then I set it on my lap and looked out at the fields. The winter mist was starting to lift as the sun climbed higher, burning away in slow wisps that rose like steam from the snow. The sky above turned from gray to pale blue, the kind of blue that promises the day will be clear even if it starts cold. Briar was safe. She was with family, real family, the kind that takes you in when your world falls apart. She was okay, and she'd called me brave. What makes a family blood or the person who warns you to run when everyone else wants you to stay still? I thought about Cedric wherever he was this Christmas morning. Probably in some lawyer's office, probably planning his defense, probably convinced he could still talk his way out of recorded evidence and sworn testimony. Probably still believing that the right words, the right performance could erase what he'd done. I felt sorry for him. Not the kind of sorry that forgives. The kind that mourns what could have been if he'd chosen differently. If he'd chosen to be a son instead of a thief. If he'd chosen to build his own life instead of stealing mine. But that was his story now, not mine. Mine was here, on this porch, in these fields, in the card from a 13-year-old girl who'd saved my life with a piece of notebook paper and a warning whispered through a phone at midnight. I thought about the word they'd used all those weeks. Will. They'd called it a will, the document that decides what happens to your things after you die, the paper that proves who gets what when you're gone. But the real will, the one that mattered, wasn't the paper Cedric wanted me to sign. It wasn't even the document I'd signed in Nora Caldwell's office with witnesses and notary stamps and legal language protecting everything Howard and I had built. The real will was the one I'd been living for 68 years. The will to stay when leaving looked easier. The will to fight when surrender seemed safer. The will to choose, really choose who deserved to carry what I'd built, what I'd protected, what I'd learned in 40 years of marriage and 3 months of betrayal. The document was just paper. The willpower was the legacy. I sipped my coffee. It had gone lukewarm while I'd been reading, but I didn't mind. The taste was familiar, comforting. The same coffee Howard and I had shared on this porch for decades, watching seasons change, watching crops grow, watching our son grow up into someone we thought we knew. Maybe we'd made mistakes. Maybe we'd given him too much without making him earn it. Maybe we'd protected him from consequences until he stopped believing consequences were real. Or maybe some people are just wired to take no matter how much you give them, no matter how much you teach them about building instead of stealing. I'd never know for sure, and I'd made peace with that. The sun was fully up now, bright and cold and clean. The mist had burned away completely, leaving the fields crisp and white under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. I thought about Howard, how he used to sit in this exact chair on winter mornings planning what we'd plant come April. Corn in the east field, soybeans in the west, always thinking ahead, always building toward the next season. He'd be proud of what I'd done. Not the fighting he'd always hated. Conflict always tried to smooth things over with words and compromise. But the standing firm, the protecting what we'd built, the choosing who deserved to inherit not just the land but the values that made the land worth having. I thought about Briar's card sitting in my lap, the careful handwriting, the apology she didn't need to make, the bravery she thought she lacked but had shown every single day since the moment she'd handed me that warning in the driveway. She'd be fine. She'd grow up. She'd go to college, and when she turned 25 with her degree and her 2 years of independent living, she'd inherit that house in Hastings, the house where I'd hidden and planned and found my spine, the house where I'd stopped being a victim and became something stronger. She'd understand why I'd set those conditions, not to punish her, to make sure she knew how to stand on her own before she had to carry anyone else's weight. The coffee cup was empty now. The sun was warm on my face despite the December cold. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a truck on the county road, someone else awake on Christmas morning going wherever they needed to go. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking the way they do in winter, and folded the blanket over the porch railing. I finished my coffee, walked back inside, and started planning what to plant in spring. And to you listening to my story, remember this? I spent 40 years building that farm with Howard, but I almost lost it because I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I trusted blood over instinct. I believed family meant automatic loyalty. Don't make my mistake. Watch for the signs. When someone starts talking about helping with your finances or your will, pay attention. Trust your gut when something feels wrong. The hardest lesson I learned is that real family isn't about DNA. It's about who protects you when everyone else wants something from you. Briar was just 13, but she had more courage than any adult around her. She saved me because she chose to, not because she had to. I believe God put that child in my life for a reason, to show me that love isn't inherited, it's earned. Sometimes the people you think you know best are the ones you've never really known at all. Trust came when I needed it most, even if it wasn't from where I expected. If my story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Revenge stories with mom at the center hit different than other family revenge stories, don't they? When I hear other revenge stories with mom fighting back, I see my own journey reflected. These family revenge stories remind us we're not alone when blood betrays us. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Silent Revenge with Phoenix. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means more than you know. One final note, while the heart of this story is true, some details have been adjusted for storytelling and to protect privacy. What matters is the message, and I hope it stays with you.